Hi there, I'm Pastor James and welcome back to the cabin. First time for this new year of 2022, and you may notice in hearing my voice that I have had COVID, so it's not been a very pleasant experience, but it's not been the worst one either. I guess everybody's experience of it is different. Mine was that it was a bit of a cold, and I'm very grateful for the fact that it wasn't worse. But I know there have been others in my family have had it worse than me, but I've actually found it quite a useful time to be working at home, being around the family more so, even though we've just had Christmas. But it's been a bit of a blessing in disguise, I have to say. And so you'll notice that I'm doing this in daylight, and the reason for that is because I've had my hours changed with my main job. So now Mondays are going to be dedicated to my ministry, and I get to do some things that I wasn't able to do before, and put more time into my online messages, my sermons, and also with time spent in devotions and prayer and reading God's Word. I'm currently reading at the moment Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and I've heard a lot about it, and I've heard a lot of apologetics on this, and people who have recommended this book say if you want to be in ministry, then this is a really good book to read. So I've made a good start, and it's quite interesting, really insightful, and how C.S. Lewis saw human nature and how we all seem to have this deeply written code of right and wrong, even though if you don't believe in God, why would there be? So interesting. But what I want to talk to you today about is the message I preached yesterday, and it's coming back to 1 Peter. And 1 Peter is the letter that was written to the Christians during a time of great persecution, and it was a really tough time, really terrifying, scary time to be a believer and follower of the Lord. But before we dive into that, I just want to think about for a moment how New Year affects us as a society. And there is this notion that we need to restart things or do things better. And if we're thinking about how people they come up with these new ideas of new lifestyles, and I'm going to get myself down the gym every week, and I'm going to eat healthier, I'm not going to do things the way I did them before. And yet, how often do they fall flat on their face? Sadly, how many people cancel their gym membership because they've realised that actually it's not for them? And that's because real change takes a lot more work than just planning on what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. There's a lot of mental preparation, a lot of mental discipline, and it's where I'm going with this passage today. So I'm just going to read to you from 1 Peter chapter 1, 13 to 16. It says, "Therefore, with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming. As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. But just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do. For it is written, 'Be holy because I am holy.'" So it's a rather sobering passage to start a new year on. In fact, it says about being fully sober, doesn't it? So if you weren't feeling quite with it and alert, then maybe this passage will snap that out of you and help you to refocus your thoughts on the Lord. So there's a reason why Peter wanted the Christians at that time to be fixed in their thinking, disciplined mentally. And it's because they were facing a huge adversary in Nero, the emperor. And Nero was hunting Christians. He wanted to put an end to them, and he tried to frame them for the fire in Rome, and which he actually profited off. And it was, there were Christians that would probably see family members bound and strung up in the streets, used as street lights, and it would have been terrifying for them. So far cry from what we've got in our lives now. So If you were to imagine in some way living in that time, your thoughts would be just racked with fear. There was just everything would just be pushed out, and all you necessarily would be thinking of is, how do I survive this? How do I keep my head down? How do I avoid this great evil? And nobody is going to be exempt from it. If you're a believer, you're at risk. So Peter wants them to keep their thoughts beyond the problem. He wants them to think about not the issues of the day, but he wants them to think about what's coming after that. Because Jesus is going to return. As he says in verse 13, with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming. So don't think necessarily about the issue in front of you. Think about the amazing solution that's coming and has already come, because Jesus is our strength and our ever-present help in trouble. So we need to take this on for ourselves. We need to consider the struggles we've got at the moment. I'm going to do a lot of coughing because COVID's still slightly lingering, but the present struggles that you have, the problems that you're up against at the moment, do they seem to consume your thinking? Do they seem to push all sense of peace and joy out? Or are you able to fix your gaze on the Lord? Because it's when we think about the problems of the world and the problems in our lives, then our gaze does drift, and then we become dead spiritually. We spiritually flatline. And to prevent that from happening, we need to be spending time in the Word. We need to be praying more. We need to be living, not just in the times in our devotions. We need to be living out what we are reading about. Showing love and forgiving ourselves. These things. So our minds are spiritual battlegrounds. I don't know if you're aware that it is the real battleground that we face. Often the thoughts that we struggle with are the real fight. For example, if somebody hurts you by saying something callous and rude, the real battle isn't in between the two of you, it's what goes on in your head afterwards. The thoughts of, how dare they say that? How can they say that when they don't even know me that well? Or they're just they're being really horrid to me. Therefore, how do I get back at them? Or I'm going to rack up this list of issues that are coming around because of the way they're behaving. These are the things which we can struggle with and wrestle with, knowing in our minds that it's wrong. Though we need to actually be showing grace and mercy and forgiveness. And these seem to be too lofty at times. They seem to be too far out there for us to obtain, because we are holding on to the grudge. We're looking at the problem, we're not looking at the solution. So there is a passage that I quite appreciate in 2 Corinthians 10, 3-5. For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. We need to take those thoughts captive. We need to say, I am not going to indulge myself in this negative thinking, or stinking thinking, as I've come to hear of it when I used to work in drug rehabs. There was a lot of stinking thinking going on there. So we need to hold those thoughts captive, and then we need to give it away to God, because the problem is going to remain our problem if we're not handing it over. If you imagine God standing there before you with his hands out saying, that's hurting you, give it to me. Why are you even looking at it any longer? Just hand it over and I'll deal with it. And we might think, yes, of course, yeah, take it. But then we take it back afterwards and we think, actually, no, I'm not done feeling stuff about this. And, God doesn't want to force himself on our problems. He wants us to hand them to him as an act of submission and sacrifice. So the enemy loves to flood our heads with information which is confusing, it's considered to be important by the world standards, or it's alluring. It's stuff which entices us because it's bad for us. And he loves to do this. He loves to tell us, well, why are you thinking about God and what God is doing when there's all this stuff that's going on here and it needs your attention? Relationships can cause so much grief, can't they? And we can fixate on relationships. How do I fix it? How do I make it better? Or how do I avoid that person because they're so mean? And Satan might be wanting you to think about that, because he'll be saying, well, you need to be on your guard, because if you're not ready when the trouble comes, then you'll be totally thrown out, and you won't know how to deal with it, and it'll only be worse for you. And he wants us to think about that, because what we're not thinking about is how do we honour God more with our minds, with our living. God is the way to deal with all of that stuff. So if our gaze is not fixed on him, it's fixed on ourselves, isn't it? Where else do we send our thoughts to if we're not thinking about God? Some challenging stuff in our passage, and I hope that this is helping. So Peter wants the Christians of that time not to think about the struggles that are in front of them. He wants them to keep their gaze fixed, and we can do this by focusing on our behaviour, on the things which honour God in a way of being obedient. We were not to conform to the evil desires that we had. The stuff that used to be hang-ups for us, we can take it all back again, can't we? And it can get between us and God. So this isn't the way for us to live. We are to be new creations. If we're starting over a new year, then maybe it is a good time to start over living in a better way. But don't think that because it's a new year, it means you're going to live the way you want, because those battles are going to be there all the time. It doesn't change with just the passing of time, passing of an old year into a new one. But in verse 15 it says, just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do. For it is written, be holy because I am holy. I'm going to look at this a bit more in detail next time, but being holy, the images that come up is like holy water and sacredness. Something that's sacrosanct is a holy thing. Holy ground, it merely means to be set apart. If we are holy, we are set apart for God. Something dedicated to the Lord. And we need to be dedicated to the Lord. We need to be set apart from the world and to be there living for God, because what else is there? Who else is there? If there is no God, that's a pretty miserable world to live in, because it's all about us then. And you know how human nature is when it's all about us. It's not a pretty sight. So I'm hoping to elaborate further in the later part of this passage next time, but I'm grateful that you're able to join me on this, and I hope that this is something, it's not to crush you or to make you feel rubbish, it's to shine light where light needs to be shone, and we are then able to deal with stuff that God is calling us to, because we all have those behaviours. We all have those areas of our life that God is saying, I want you to work on this, and yet we can justify it by saying, no, God doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to God that I've got this issue in my life. He's big enough to deal with it. He can overlook it. He overlooked stuff in the Old Testament. Why can't he overlook this one little thing? Well, actually, I think you'll find that everything matters to God. Every area of our life matters to him. And he will be speaking to you about it, whatever it is. And we can run and we can run and run, but eventually we'll be forced to look at it, and it won't be as pleasant as it would be if we stop now and deal with that stuff. Only you know what it is. I've got my issues, I've got my trappings, my shortcomings and failures, and I know God speaks to me about those too. And I'm hoping that with His help, I will be able to overcome them. But for now, I'm going to say goodbye, and I'll see you again soon. Have a good week. Bye for now.